welcome back to the Best Worst Thing. This is Joshua Lewa, and I'm really excited about our guest today. Our guest today, many people know her from being the founder and chief bear at Build-A-Bear Workshop, which was founded in 1997. And of course, Build-A-Bear has gone on to bring joy and happiness in so many people's lives, including my own and my young one. Prior to that time, she was the president for Payless Shoe Stores and the executive vice president for Venture Stores, as well as she worked with Famous Bar and so many other areas. And so we'll definitely get into that momentarily. Currently, she serves as the CEO and president of the Clark Fox Foundation. She also serves as the chief inspirator at the Del Mar Divine, which I'm super excited to learn more about. This is going to be a great chance to share with people not only in the St. Louis region, but around the country and around the world about what you're doing. What I really find impactful about my guest is her work. She does a lot of work within the K-12 system, behind the scenes, in front of the scenes, and supporting a lot of nonprofits and large, really nationwide organizations and local organizations. But she's also a mentor for women and minority entrepreneurs. And so just a life of service that's really perfectly matches her life in entrepreneurship. Born in Coral Gables, Florida, Maxine's life of this entrepreneurship and service is really inspirational, and I'm really excited to learn more.
Going one way is a two ways. It's the hard days that bring me back to love. Going
Welcome, Maxine Clark.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
I mentioned, I know that's in 1997, this company Build-A-Bear comes around, and it's, I know people never see the behind the scenes part of it, and it builds to be this incredible. I can tell you, I was watching the Avengers. You may have seen the Avengers Infinity War, and he said to the one character, for a second, I thought you were Build-A-Bear, and I thought, oh gosh, if she hasn't made it yet, she's officially arrived in my world. So I appreciated it.
Thank you. Yeah, we've become a part of popular culture. We were on a Simpsons episode, and we were on Oprah in 2004. That was a really exciting day, and we've been on Letterman show and just on different places where people bring Build-A-Bear into their life. So I'm really excited about it. It never ceases to amaze me that we created something much larger than I could have possibly anticipated.
What a life. Absolutely. It's just amazing that this big thing has grown out of that. I got to say also too, one of the things I joke around with my friends about is I'm going to get Oprah on the show. And the fact that you've actually been on the Oprah show, to me, again, puts you at a whole nother level. But I do want to talk about what you're currently doing right now, both with the Clark Fox and with the Del Mar Divine. So I'd love to hear more about that.
Yes. Our family foundation, which actually was started in 2004, but with the proceeds of taking Build-A-Bear public, I invested my own money in Build-A-Bear, and I had other investors eventually. And when we went public in 2004, and within 7 years of starting the company, it allowed me to build some great assets and wealth. And we put it in our family foundation so that when we both retired, we would have time to give back to our community in a significant way. And while we've been doing that over time, giving to things that we care about, education, healthcare, working to end the tremendous issues that we have with mass incarceration and the prison system in America, racial equity. We've been giving to those things, but we never really, there were a lot of small things, but then we started to do some big things. And that really, so that they'll be lasting beyond our time on this earth. Because they're things we care about, we know other people care about, but you can't just do them with little $100 here and $100 there. We're lucky enough to be able to give back. And one of the reasons we give so much to education is because children are the reason, at least for my business, that we were so successful, is we really touch the hearts of children and their families. And because of that, we give back to children and their families.
That's wonderful. I'm really curious about where this came from, where this value of just service. I mean, again, you've had a wildly successful professional career, but there's this other piece that you show up consistently, and you are building a legacy for well beyond your time. But where did this all come from?
Well, it comes from a combination of things. I think we don't always know when they're happening to us. It's kind of, we don't have that aha moment right then and there. But my mother, my parents were first generation Americans. They had a high school education. And my father learned his trade in the military. He was an electrician. And my mother was a social worker, but not by going to Brown School of Social Work. Or she worked for Eleanor. She had better, I think, a better education. She was Eleanor Roosevelt's private traveling secretary during World War II. My mother was from Albany, New York. My parents were both from there. And when Franklin and Eleanor were the president and the governor and first lady of New York, my mother was in the typing pool. And she graduated from high school at a very young age and went to work. And Eleanor loved that my mother was such a fast typist. And so she picked her out of the crowd to go with her. And my mother also did stenography, which nobody even knows what that is anymore, but shorthand. My mother went with her to Washington, and my father was in the military, so he went off to World War II. And my mother went to Washington, D.C., and she traveled with Eleanor Roosevelt wherever. She only worked when she traveled, but she traveled a lot. And they went to places like asylums and institutions where children were put away, like children that had different mental or physical disabilities. And she hated that. She just couldn't believe that they were doing this to children, that parents would actually send their children away, but there was no other way for them to acculturate them or to train them. There was no special education departments in schools. There was no way. And so Eleanor encouraged my mother, and my mother and several women friends of hers started a school in Miami called Hope School. And it was for children with Down syndrome, but it was called then Mongoloidism. And my mother and all these women across the country, it wasn't just one person, it just sort of happened at the same time. And all of these women found their power and their ability to make a difference and started these movements all across the country for sheltered workshops, for all kinds of, and so children stopped being institutionalized and their life expectancy became normal, like anybody else. And they were able to be many, many children, the most of the children actually, brought in, mainstreamed into society, into schools, into work. And so we now see a whole different, life for those children that have Down syndrome. So my mother was also always harping on charity and doing good. And even when I would roll my eyes at my mother, like most of us do, she would, my sister and I would get in the car with my mother on Saturday mornings and go to the school, even if it was just for a few hours. And I didn't really want to go all the time because I wanted to be with my friends. But once I got there and I saw the children always look forward to us coming, and they didn't see us as any different than them. And we would stay there for a few hours and do things with them. And then we would get in the car and come back home. And it just sat with me for a really long time that, that's what we're supposed to do. We're lucky to be put on this earth. And if we can do something for just one thing, all we have to do is one thing for someone else, we can make a difference. And fortunately, it isn't always about money, quite frankly. It's more about time than it is about money. Because mentorship and caring about others is more of a time commitment than a money commitment. So that, and then I went to work for the May department stores out of college. And the May company was a very charitable company. And in fact, they had a matching gifts program. So I think they don't know how much that teaches people, but when I would give $100 to some charity, they would match it with another 100. So it became 200. And when I could give 500, it became 1,000. When I could give 1,000, it became 2,000. And so my gifts kept getting larger and larger because I worked for a company that valued my giving. And in fact, I remember a meeting I was at where my boss called me, the CEO of the company called out that I was the only one that had maxed out their matching gifts that year because they set a limit. I think it was like, it started at 5,000, then I think it became 10, and that I was the only one that had used all my money. And I was not one of the highest paid people in the room at the time, that was for sure. So that calling me out on that on a positive way made me do more because I saw that it was noticed and it was appreciated. And of course it was appreciated by the organization. So, lots of things in your life set examples for you. And I think that working for a great company like I did for so many years really just reinforced my parents and my teachers and my religious training, much more so. I mean, that actually brought it to life for me. And then when I was able to do more in our company at Build-A-Bear, we were from day one, we started doing charitable things, making animals that gave, if you bought that animal, a certain percentage of that purchase went to a particular charity, whether it was wildlife, animal, dogs and cats in the Humane Society, whether it was children that had diseases, if it was literacy. We always made all the time. We had many, many animals that every time you bought one, you also were giving back to something good. And we wanted children to learn that as from their experience at Build-A-Bear. And we know that they did. We had many, many letters and many, many positive comments through the 23 years of Build-A-Bear being in business about what that meant to their family.
That's amazing. So to me, it sounds like your mother was almost your original teacher, you know?
Oh, definitely. She was a what do they say? A piece of work. My mother was a very strong person, and my mother was a civil rights activist also. And we had very many interesting friends in our family. And we stood up for many, many different rights, not just of the differently abled, as my mother would have called them, but for all people. And I learned at a very young age that there was no difference between me and anyone else, other than my white privilege. We weren't rich, but I had white privilege. And I was a woman before women were really being treated as equals. Still, we've got a long way to go. So I have some empathy, but I could not walk in the experience of somebody who was African American or Hispanic or any other race or religion or race predominantly. And I, wanted to learn from everybody else. So that was another thing, is when you learn from other people, when you ask questions and share, sometimes that question can say, what do you want to know that for? That's none of your business. But other times it's one of those things that breaks down the door, that makes us friends, that makes us know each other, our vulnerabilities and the things that we have in common. And so I have amazing lifelong friends that didn't look like me, didn't come from my background, but we found common ground. And I wish that for everyone. I feel so fortunate that I grew up in a family that valued diversity, but also that I went to school with so many different people, and I appreciate it. I grew up in Miami. It wasn't integrated when I first went to school, but we had early in my school years, the Cuban refugees were coming to Miami. So that was its own challenge. And then when the schools became much more integrated, we lived right near a neighborhood that was African American. And so we all came to school together. And I don't even remember that it was any kind of it was just fun and great. And we were cheerleaders and sports players and debaters. And it was a very unique school. I mean, the neighborhood, the school that came with us was also middle-class Black families, and they came to our school. And but I didn't ask the question of my Black friends, like, what else could I do? What's missing for you? And as adults, when we got back together at our 10-year reunions every 10 years or so, I finally had the nerve to ask the question, and I learned a lot. And I wish I could go back to those years and do some things a little bit differently. But they had a huge impact on me. And we had a good relationship, but it could have been better had I known enough to ask some different questions.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's an incredible background that you have, and the fact that you were actually able to go to school with and to be raised around such a wide range of people. Just from the start with your mom's experience, and then just even at your school is incredible. It's something that I was fortunate enough to have grown up in Southern California, and I do think that people do miss out on a lot of really great opportunities. But something else that really stands out to me is, as you kind of reflect and think, gosh, I wish I had that back then. But you've done so much and you've learned so much. And we always hear the terms like when you know better, you do better. And it sounds like you found a way to repurpose yourself at this stage in your life. So can you talk to me a little bit more about now you putting that into action? You are putting it into action.
So thank you for asking that question, because this excites me, what we've been able to do. And one of the things that I had great teachers growing up. I went to public school from first grade through college, and I had a great education. And I am a big believer in public education. I can't imagine that people pay for private school. They shouldn't have to pay for private school, because going to public school with all kinds of different socioeconomic groups and people from different backgrounds is part of the education process. But anyway, it is what it is at this point. I want to get back to the good old days, not the good old days of segregated schools, but we're actually more segregated now than we were then. And I want to get back to the days when we could go to public school together with different people and enjoy each other's differences and learn from them. But so I got involved in education, in public education here, helping our public school systems, trying to attract more teachers. I had great teachers. I love my teachers. I still love them. I'm still in touch with many of them. A funny story is that we always think our teachers are so much older than us, and I remember when I took Build-A-Bear public, I wanted to share some of the wealth with my teachers, because I would not have been where I was. And I had to find some of them, because I didn't, you knew them by their Mrs. Adams or Mrs. Smith or Mr. Rosnick, or whatever their names were. And I hired a private detective to help me find my journalism teacher, who was so special. And little did I know she was still lived in exactly the same house she lived in then, but I didn't know where that was. You didn't know where your teachers lived. And we reconnected at a store opening for Build-A-Bear. And when I saw her, I knew that she wasn't that much older. But the private detective asked me, "How old do you think she is?" And I said, "Well, I was 17, so she was probably 35. So that would have made her twice my age. And it turns out she was only 5 years older than me, and I was her second class that she taught.
Wow.
And so she was such a great teacher. And when I got involved with Teach for America, which is a lot of young people who didn't necessarily intend to be teachers, my high school government teacher, Mr. Rosnick, who was a phenomenal teacher, turned out that he was a teacher for many years, and then he went back to law school and he became a judge. He was my government teacher. He was a fantastic government teacher, and he loved government and he loved the law, and he went to law school and he became a judge and created the family drug courts in Miami. So, you don't know exactly where how old your teachers are. They're younger than you think, and they're not so, archaic and old fashioned, and use them to teach you. And they're not so far removed from your world. Maybe you think your parents are, but your teachers probably aren't. It's a job for young people. It takes a lot of stamina, for sure. So I got involved with that and then we got involved in starting charter schools here in St. Louis, the KIPP charter schools, which are a nationwide group of about 200 schools across the country that are focused on giving all children access to a high quality education. And we have about 6 of those now, including elementary, K to 12 high school, K to elementary schools, middle schools, and high school now. And those kids have just become part of my life. Our first middle school was the 5th graders. When they went to high school, we did not have a high school for them. So we put them, as many as we could, into the best public schools in their city, and also into private schools where they could get a scholarship. And many of them are in college. In fact, the first class, the 5th graders, we called them the class of 2021 because that would be the year they would graduate from college. And so that was important. So that class is graduating next year, and I can't wait to go to their graduations. I'm so excited. And they're at Duke and Vanderbilt and Washington University, and they were working this summer in the United States government and in law firms and in all kinds of things. They just have achieved amazing things at a young age already. And part of it is sharing the same experiences that I had, encouraging them to go do those themselves and connecting my network to them wherever I can. And I've gotten way more back what I learned from them, because even though they do treat me, I'm old enough to be their grandmother, they still share more than they think they do with me. And especially their challenges being a student of color in a predominantly white world. I think they thought they could conquer everything and they would never cry and never be sad, but that happens. And we talk about it, and we work on how to deal with it. And for me now, it's really about, and that's how I found the Dalmar Divine, actually, right where our KIPP school was. One day I just turned right instead of left and turned around the corner, and they were putting the sign in for this gigantic building that was an old hospital that was up for sale. And I wondered what they're going to do to this. If this stands vacant for years, which it already has, it is going to be a terrible eyesore in this neighborhood that's just coming back because we reopened a school there and put 600 children to in elementary school. We have to do something. And so we have a program here in St. Louis called Cortex, which is a giant campus for investing in STEM and technology companies, startups, kind of our version of Silicon Valley. And I thought we could do the same for nonprofits. So I got on the phone and called the leader of that and said, why don't you open up a Cortex West here? And he said, why don't you do it? I've got a lot on my plate. And that's kind of how it happened. I just said, okay, yeah, why not me? And I started working on it. And we took an option on the property, and we came up with a business plan. And hopefully it will open next year about this time or in early fall. And it's going to be a two-part project. But the first part has 3 parts, which is offices for nonprofits, a co-working space for nonprofits and for-profits, young people. And where it's situated in the city of St. Louis is going to be a great place for young African-American people to come and, get mentorship for their nonprofit or for their business. So we're really excited about that and supporting leaders of color. And then we'll have apartments, 150 apartments for teachers, nurses, social workers, those young, diverse professionals that want to live in a cool place but can't really afford it, because even in St. Louis, it's expensive to live on a teacher's salary. And then in the second phase, we're going to hopefully have an early childhood and maybe through elementary school that's high performing, really whatever the state of the art is at that moment, one that actually teaches African American history from the get-go. It is really important to me that we bring out the best history that we have, and that means the good, the bad, and the not so beautiful stuff that we have to talk about, so that we don't make those same mistakes again. I think that's what's happened to us. We never knew, and so we continued to make the same mistakes. It's not an excuse, but if we weren't taught that it was bad, how do we know that? Because we learn so much in school, we learn so much from our families. So I'm determined to that. But the best part about what I do now is, I'm not that I'm old by any stretch of the imagination, at least not in my mind, in my chronological years. Somebody might say yes, but I want to invest in young people. I don't want to dump it on them, but I want to empower them because they know what they want and what they need, just like I did when I was their age. And at least I thought I did. And I wanted to go to work at it. And people didn't necessarily give me that seat at the table right away. And so I don't want to make those mistakes because I think they know a lot more than I did at their age. And so I'm out there trying to invest invest financially, yes, but meaning invest my time, my experience in these incredibly talented young people who want to make a difference in the world. And one of the ways you invest is you listen and you learn and you challenge and you listen again and you hear it back again and you say, okay, I might not do it that way, but I get why you want to do it that way. Go for it. And we'll see what happens. And right now there's lots of ways to go about solving a problem. We have a lot of problems and lots of things to solve. We always have, and we probably always will, but we're not going to do it. My generation is not going to do it. We need the younger generation, and they need they may not think they need us. Like I didn't think I needed anybody older than me either, but they do. But they don't necessarily need us telling them what to do. They need us listening and maybe giving them a few hints and connections, making those connections for them that we had. And that's really a big opportunity, I think.
So that's amazing that you said that. You know, it stands out to me, the idea of actually listening to them, listening to these young people and their experiences and building off of that. I think this Del Mar Divine is going to be a great opportunity here locally in St. Louis for a community that has no shortage of need, but has a lot of creative and really ambitious people, of a community that values education and wants to do better for itself. And so what a gift. But I want to go back to that point about listening to these young people, because I was watching an interview of you earlier when you talked about when you founded Build-A-Bear and listening to a young person.
Mm-hmm. That was our board of directors.
The inspiration. That was the board of directors. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. Well, I am. I guess it's because I'm only 4'10", that I can see eye to eye with children. But I had a wonderful childhood, and I think every adult needs to make sure that they can go backwards and have a good childhood. It's not. There's so many things that affect us, but I had a good upbringing, and I want that for all children. And I love being around children because they don't have any preconceived notions. They ask you a ton of questions. If you let them, they'll ask you questions all day long. And so I think that's good. I want to encourage curiosity because I was I still am. I'm the first person in any meeting room that raises their hand. I have a question. And they all know, oh God, here goes another question about education or another question about young people, or, I'm a pretty much a broken record. But I want to encourage that. I don't want to discourage it. And sometimes when you're growing up, people tell you, your parents say, listen, better to be seen and not heard, show respect. And, sometimes the kids bursting with a question, but they just don't think they can ask it. And I can kind of see that in the eyes of kids because I'm at the same height, so I see that and I want to inspire that. The other is I learned so much, and it makes me realize that I'm not as old as I think I am, because my ideas aren't that far off. I'll say, I wonder what they're thinking about. And they'll tell me, and I'll go, I agree with that. That's exactly what I would have done. It makes me feel like I'm not so out of date. And I think that's what happens to a lot of us. We get so far removed from reality and from each other. And we look at everything through different, whatever lens we're supposed to, whatever age we are. And I think that's the worst thing we can do. I just really feel that I'm very, very fortunate to have so many young friends, and also to have older friends that are older. So we sort of fit in the middle, and they both give a lot to the table. So for me, that's joyful. It is totally joyful. I would much rather be with kids than with adults. So, and I used to, when I was a kid, wanted to be with the adults. I would always be snooping in my parents' friends' conversation. But, what goes around comes around, I guess. And then but we have so many smart and talented people. One of the things that I get when I'm, in my community work that I do is get to meet these young people. But another project that I'm engaged in is about maybe 6 or 7 years ago, we brought to St. Louis the Network for Teaching Entrepreneurship, which operates out of the high schools in the city in North County that are, and teaches the entrepreneurial spirit. And so I've met these young people that invent products and services that are unbelievable. And I wish I could invest in every single one of them. I wish they were already through college or through whatever their high school is, so they could go do it. But it isn't so much about doing the business, it's about the thinking process that you go through in thinking about entrepreneurship. But I've met so much talent, and St. Louis could be one of the biggest cities in the country if we unleash that talent. And that's what I want to do. I want to give them the power and introduce them to people who can invest in them, who really have the skill set that they need, whether it's technology, it might be retail, I can help on that. It might be some kind of science, medicine and bioscience. And I was it just excites me to listen to them, because that's what's possible. And the world can be a much better place. And it's not maybe a little bit Pollyanna, but maybe the 20-year-old kid's not going to make it all the way to this billionaire job. And not every job has to be billionaires, We can be very successful without being billionaires. I'm not a billionaire. Most of the successful people in America are not billionaires, and certainly not the happy people. So I think we have a lot of opportunity. There's a lot of room there to be successful. And then also trying to help them. They say, "Oh, what can I do to pay you back? What can I do?" Just pay it forward. When you get the opportunity, when you're in a position, just do the same thing. And I know they will. I know they're that kind of young people that really have a heart that's what they want to be successful for. They don't want to just be successful for them. They have their own family they want to support, but they also have their community that they want to look up to them and to give back to the community. So that's the name of the game. That's capitalism at its best.
That's great. Very, very powerful. So I want to just take a second here before we transition to the last question. It's the best worst thing, so we'll be right back.
No sleep, only for the weary. Don't speak, let your dreams escape. Nothing that I can say or do can take away my pain for you. Taming the beast is not so easy now.
All right. So as you know, Maxine, this podcast is called the Best Worst Thing Podcast. It's just this idea about naming a personal or professional experience where there was a setback or a challenge, and you finding your way through it. So if you could think about that and maybe tell us that story of what your best worst thing was and the lessons you learned along the way that you'd love for other people to take away from this conversation.
Well, there's really been many. I mean, I think that the way you learn is by making mistakes, because if everything goes like, rosy all the time, you don't even realize what you don't know. You just think you know everything. So there's lots of mistakes all along the way, like things that I thought at the time that were, when I was a little girl, when I was just in kindergarten, they changed the age that you started first grade. So I had to go to kindergarten twice. And really, you didn't even need to go to kindergarten then. But I was really sad. I thought that was like the end of the earth. I remember like crying, and just couldn't sleep at night. And my teacher, who I had the same teacher, she made me her assistant in her classroom, and she made me like the leader of the class. And that has its own challenges when you're 5 and 6 years old. But that helped me see that it wasn't such a bad thing, I wasn't failing, I was actually succeeding. And my first grade teacher took it to a whole nother level, because she taught us about mistakes by giving us a reward every Friday, her pencil that she graded our papers with, her red pencil. So I learned that you can make mistakes and be rewarded, because mistake, as long as you know you made one, is a good thing. But I think I've always learned from them, and it's a hard one to think about. But I would say that many times I was turned down for something I thought I deserved. But when I got to what I thought, the next step was better. So I remember when I thought I was ready to be the president of a May department stores division. And two other men were picked before me, and they weren't nearly as good as I was, I thought. And I kind of in my head said, it's just because they're men and all that. And then the opportunity to be the president of Payless Shoe Source came along, which was the biggest division of the May company. I loved shoes. I I loved shoes. It was one thing I could buy and I didn't have to fix it because I could just put them on and walk out and wearing a whole new pair of shoes. So for me, shoes was a really big deal. And I got to learn from the founders of the company who had, when we bought the company, I was involved in the acquisition team and I got to learn from them. So it was like kind of going into the family business in a way. And when it was time to, and then 4 years later, the May company decided to sell the company after I was the president of the company. They decided to spin it off as a separate company. And it gave me the chance to go into, to leave and start my own business. And because I did not want to really stay in Topeka, Kansas, no offense to Topeka, Kansas, but I wanted to come back to St. Louis. I wanted to do, and it dawned on me that I didn't have to go to work for somebody else. I could go start my own business. I had the wherewithal, the financial wherewithal, and I had the experience now. And I never thought about it before. And so I decided I was going to do something for children. But it was that, that it wasn't like so much as it was a failure, as much as it was not a success. When the May company decided to sell the company, I felt it like a failure. Like, the May company's not going to take this business forward. So, that was like, I took it very personally, but I turned it into something really positive for me. And it was just like a couple of days of feeling kind of depressed about it. And then I said, let me just take this money and go do something good with it. And I invested in my own business because most people thought, well, when I finally decided about Build-A-Bear, people thought I was crazy. Not kids, but adults. And I think that we had one big mistake when I was in Build-A-Bear. So you thought there was only one, but there's many. We had really early in our business, like maybe a month into it, our warehouse in North County, the roof collapsed on top of all of our merchandise that we'd bought. We were only a couple weeks into the business, and I realized I hadn't bought enough insurance, and I didn't. But fortunately, my vendors were so excited. The people that were making the product, they said, "Don't worry about it. Pay us when you can. Just tell us what you need, and we'll ship it back to you." And we only had one store, so they could make it in their back sample room in China and get it back to us. And then my first investor, he said, "Don't worry about it. We'll put more money in if you need it." But our business got so good really fast that we didn't really need that. And so that bad experience of that happening made me look at what we were selling and what we weren't selling, because I had to buy the stuff we were selling. And I realized there were some things we weren't selling. And I wouldn't have looked at it probably till after Christmas because we were so busy. So we sold out of all the bad stuff too, because we didn't have any good stuff left. We sold out of the bad stuff, and then the good stuff came in again. So that was a lesson also in, number one, make sure you have enough insurance. But the insurance company didn't pay us for 5 years anyway. But also that, just pick yourself up, dust yourself off, get going. Because what are you going to do if you sit there and go, wring your hands about the warehouse? You're not going to have a business. And I just started. I could have just closed in a month. It would have been so embarrassing and so scary. And how would I have paid all my, my debts? And I had a 10-year lease at the Galleria. And so there was no choice. I don't see things like what a disaster that is. I say, okay, what can I learn from this? And same things happened during COVID. I have used this time to really thrive. I've used this time to attend meetings I never would have attended because I don't have to get in my car and go.
That's right.
I can tune in, and I've learned so much that I wouldn't have known. And then of course we've had all of this civic unrest that has also taught me a lot because I've listened to a lot of young people on Zooms and on phone calls, and I've gotten to see a lot of really heartfelt, deep, open wounds teach me. And while I can't have lived that experience, I can listen. And it has been that, when people ask me how you are, I say, I'm actually thriving. I've learned so much. Yes. And I don't mean it any disrespect to the bubble that the people around me, I live in a bubble, but I have felt very nurtured by learning in this time period. And I am a little bit hesitant, when are we all going to go back to our office? When are we going to go back to work? Because I don't want to give up that learning, that time to learn that we've had, that slower pace forced on us. But I don't want to be sick, and I don't want anybody else to be sick. So let's get going, is pretty much the story. So there's no one thing, at least not at my age. You cross many, many challenges, but you have to turn them into opportunities.
That's great. I really resonate with that. That's actually the whole purpose of this podcast, is that exact thing, is that whether it's personal or professional, you get these disappointments, unmet expectations, failures, even crisis. And what is it that you do to turn it around? And, I think for me, one of the follow-ups I have for you is where does that persistence come from? Because I'm hearing not getting the position, and it sounds like unfairly so. At least that's how you experienced it during that time. I'm hearing a major crisis with a roof collapse and being underinsured and so many other things. And you say to keep going, right?
Yeah.
Keep going. There's no choice. Where does that come from?
That's a good question. I don't know, because my father was moderately successful. I mean, he had a small business. He was an entrepreneur, but I didn't know what that was. Then he had his own electrician business and electrical sales. My mother was definitely an entrepreneur, but she was more a volunteer, an advocate, many, many things. And I just have, from a very young age, looked up to people and seen what they have. And it's not about envy, although maybe a little bit. It's more about aspiration. And how do you get where you think you want to go? And sometimes you get there and you realize that wasn't so hot. What was so great about that? And so you pivot and you can turn. And I've had many of those experiences. Like when I got to be the president of Payless, it was a wonderful thing, but it wasn't what I thought it was going to be. I couldn't really turn, it was such a big business. I couldn't turn it around on a dime. I couldn't change the entire culture of the company. But when I started Build-A-Bear, I could. But if I hadn't had that Payless experience, I wouldn't have even realized that probably.
That's right.
So I think that I'm also, a very optimistic person. And I think that was taught to me by my family, that there was so much opportunity out there. I never felt, when I think about an animal that I might relate to, it's a giraffe who's not 4'10". Giraffes are always looking over and they can see everything. And they're kind of like just chomping on the trees and, getting a look at the world. And I kind of feel like that too. I've learned a lot just from paying attention. And, I just feel like I don't know any other way. I just don't. My parents were, not unsuccessful, but not, rich or corporate executives or any of that. They were just good people. And we lived in a middle-class neighborhood where everybody worked hard and, came home from work. Dads came home from work at 5:30 and they rang the bell and all the kids came running home for dinner. And the next day we went to school and started playing after school, and the same thing all over. Just good values, I think, good American values. And we've lost our way in some of those things. I think the idea of neighborhoods, and St. Louis has so many incredible neighborhoods. I don't want to tear down the neighborhoods. I want to unite them and bring them back to life because I think they have such beautiful history. And I didn't grow up here, but I cared about my high school too. In Miami, we didn't have the same, history of asking what high school you went to. But when you found out where somebody lived, you said, my cousin went to that high school. Did you know my cousin? And we had huge high schools. I mean, huge. I had 1,000 people in my high school senior class. So huge schools. But all that's just part of like growing up and learning and, finding your way. And it's kind of the original Jeep in St. Louis. It's the kind of original mapping, is what high school did you go to? Where did you live? Well, it gives you a perspective. It's a perspective. But if you didn't venture into that person's world, you didn't gain a similar perspective. You just knew where they went to high school. I went to go see those high schools. I've been to almost every high school in St. Louis. A lot of them are closed. Yes. What makes this so special? And you can kind of feel it when you walk into the buildings of some of these old buildings like Sumner and Soldan and Roosevelt. Some of these high schools that have been around for 100 years.
Yes.
You feel the history. You feel all the people that went before you, that white and black, that learned in these schools. And, I don't want them torn down. I want to save them. They may not necessarily have to be schools, but I think the buildings are worth saving and finding new ways to learn in them. And that's really what our hospital is going to be. The old St. Luke's Hospital is going to be a place for people to be cared for, but not the old way in a hospital, but in a 21st century way through nonprofits that work together, mostly led by young African-American leaders, but not all, to help them, really work together to solve St. Louis's problems.
That's wonderful. I think the persistence that you're sharing, the connecting to the history, and in fact, even physically, the idea of persisting with these buildings and their history and carrying them on and being repurposed is amazing. I think you've also repurposed your life as well, going from the corporate sector into this other world where you are making a difference in other ways. So I know we're getting near the end here, but I wanted to ask you if you had a piece of advice or two for people who are listening about going through these challenges and getting through it. How would you summarize that? What would you say?
Yeah, I would say that one thing I believe in is a plan, as a business plan. Or I kept a diary when I was a little girl, and I can pull out that diary and I can read the pages, and it could be from 1966, and I read it and I know exactly what I was thinking, and I could see myself coming to be the person I am today. And I think it's sort of a plan. If you write it down, you kind of acknowledge it, the good and the bad, the feelings that you had. And maybe girls are better at this than boys, but it's like a business plan. And I really talk to kids about this, whether they're 10 years old or not. I said, put yourself, what do you want people to say about you when you're not here anymore on this earth? What do you want your tombstone to say? And they'll go, oh, what does that mean? And then, I said, then let's put that down. And then let's go back and put your baby pictures in. And where did your name come from? Ask your parents where your name came from. And then in the middle, put your, where you are today. Not quite the middle, it depends on what age they are. Usually we start about this with the 10-year-olds. But, put yourself there and take one of those black composition books, that you have in school. Oh, yeah. And then keep adding to it and putting down your thoughts. And it only belongs to you. Nobody will see it. You can use an eraser. Don't do it on a computer. You could do it on a computer, but I say don't do it on a computer. Write it down, glue down your pictures, put the souvenirs that you remember from something, and put them in there so that when you're 10 years from now, you remember that you did that and why you did it. And maybe you're going to do something else for that same exact reason, but you'd forgotten it. And I think it's a plan, and it's not, you got to convince yourself first before you convince others that what you're doing is worth it. Whether it's, something that you want to do as a business or as a charity or as an educational prospect. And if you're not convinced, then no one else is going to believe you. So that's what I call a plan. And I didn't realize when I was keeping my diary that it was really a plan, but it was a in time plan, going on in real time. And when I look back on it, I'm just sort of astounded that I had a similar thought yesterday to a thought I might have had 50 years ago. How is that possible? And I had so much different experience now, but you are who you say you are. And, I think that is another reason when you write it down, it kind of becomes something a part of you, the good and the bad. I mean, I did some things my mother would have, washed my mouth out with soap. I said bad things. I remember telling my mother to shut up. My father punished me for a week. And, I'll never forget those things. They were, but you have to do them in order to know they're wrong to do. You have to take a risk. And, it makes you mad, it makes you angry, it makes you happy, whatever it is. And acknowledge it, put it down, write it down. And so you remember it. And I always had that, I think I was, when I was a little girl, I read the Diary of Anne Frank, and it had a big impact on me of trying to be remembered, even if you're not here anymore. And so, but for me, it was more than that. It was about not wanting to forget that idea that I had when I was 10, by the time I was 20, because I had some pretty good ideas. Looking back on them, some of them were silly, but some of them were really good. And my teddy bear, Teddy, who I lost when I was 10 years old, had a huge impact on me. And so, who knows, maybe that's the real inspiration behind Build-A-Bear was my teddy bear, cleverly named Teddy. Kids today name their bears very creative names, but he was really important to me. And I see that in every child that makes a bear at Build-A-Bear, that it's very important to them. So I hope they have as good a life as I had. Half as good would be good, because it's been a great life. And it's going on, thank goodness, but there's much more to do. And I want to do it through the eyes of young people like yourself and others who are changing the world.
That's what a wonderful note to end on. Can I just say a couple of things that really stand out to me here?
Sure.
These are all quotables for sure. You are who you say you are. This idea of writing it down being so powerful and important, really being almost your personal business plan for yourself. And you have to convince yourself first before you convince others. And I think those are very, very concrete and powerful things that people can really focus in on if they want to attain any level of happiness and success. And so I think you are a wonderful example of that, and you continue to be that to us, not only here locally, but nationally and globally. So
thank you.
Thank you so much for being here.
It's wonderful to meet you, Josh. Thank you, Joshua.
Thank you for listening to the Best Worst Thing podcast. I'm your host, Josh Walelo. Music is produced by DJ Josh One. You can follow him at Boom Note on Instagram and Twitter, and Josh One on Spotify. The Best Worst Thing podcast is edited by Cool Jets Audio and Visual. You can find them at Cool Jets AV on Instagram. Our marketing is designed by Francesca Daniels. You can find her at FrankandKitty24 on Instagram. And our overall design is by Inspired Design with Ryan Daniels. You can find them at getinspired.design on Instagram. Please download us from iTunes, Spotify, or your favorite platform. And remember to share us with your friends, especially those people you think really need us in their life. Don't forget to give us a 5-star review. Thank you for listening to The Best Worst Thing.
The cool Cali kid from the boondocks. Bounce to your hood like Chaka with a crime on. Independent thing to play a beat, I get my rhyme on. So when I strut on a path to perfection, city to your borough, to your town, to your streets. Keep your party live, Josh One got beats out of nature. Grazer, Oakland, strays to Asia. It's like Fraser, force of Fantasia. Move through your